there is goodness in everybody. I do believe that.
Power to Live More with Joe Dodds.
Welcome to the Power to Live More podcast, all about productivity, organisation, well-being, energy and resilience. I'm Jo Dodds, and I started this show to enable interesting people to share their stories about how they use their power to live more, and by that I mean to do the stuff that they want to do more than the stuff that they need to or should do. It's about creating a life for yourself where you have the energy, health and space to be happy and fulfilled, spending your time as you'd like, whether that be at work, home or somewhere else entirely. That's your choice.
Hello. My name is Ellie Dodds and I am co-presenter, and today Jo is interviewing Madeleine Black. Madeleine was introduced to us by Jackie Handy from show number 173. The sharing of her story publicly on the Forgiveness Project's website in September 2014 opened many doors for Madeleine in ways she never imagined, and the invitations started to pour in. Many women and men got in contact and explained how reading her story gave them strength, hope and a different perspective of what's possible in their lives. She has taken part in both TV and radio interviews and has been invited to share her story of being gang raped as a teenager at conferences, book events, schools, etc. She recognises that she was a victim of a crime that left her silent for many years, but has now found her voice and intends to use it, not just for her, but for so many who can't find theirs yet. In March 2018, she won the Amazing Strength Award at the #1 magazine Amazing Women Awards, and in October of the same year was asked to be the patron for Say Women, a Scottish organisation which offers safe accommodation and support to young women who are survivors of sexual abuse/rape and who are homeless. She is one of 50 thrivers taking part in research by the Global Resilience Project to develop a resilience blueprint for others. She is a TEDx speaker, a storyteller for the Forgiveness Project, and has recently become involved with their programme Restore, sharing her story in prisons. In June 2020, she was asked to be Patron for Justice Is Now, an organisation that campaigns to end the use of rape myths and victim blaming in the criminal justice system. Her memoir Unbroken was published on April 4th, 2017, and she continues to work as a psychotherapist. Back to the studio.
Today I'm interviewing Madeleine Black. Welcome, Madeleine. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Lovely. So start by telling us a bit about who you are, what you do, and crucially, where you do it.
Well, I am a speaker, I'm an author, and I am a psychotherapist. And I really speak out to end the silence surrounding sexual violence. I share my own personal story to help others find their courage and their voice too. And before COVID, I was speaking all over the world, but currently I've been doing a lot of Zoom talks and a few in person, but not many.
Mm-hmm. And where are you based?
I am based in Glasgow. I'm a Londoner living up in Scotland.
And so normally would you work from home, albeit then travelling to do all your speaking?
No, this is all new to me. I would normally be travelling all over the place, and I worked in the centre of Glasgow in the counselling centre for a long time, for about 12 years. So yeah, it's quite new, all this working at home stuff.
Yes. And how did it all come about? And you know, I guess there's a story there from what you've already said, but also presumably it's been a bit of a development as well, because what you're doing now does fit with, by the sounds of it, what you were already doing, but obviously with a sort of, I guess, a trauma scenario somewhere in there as well. So how did you end up doing what you do now?
Well, it was about 6 years ago, and I shared my story with an organisation called the Forgiveness Project, which is based in London. My story went live on their website, which was the first time I had ever shared my story in really publicly ever. It took me about 35 years to share it. Wow. And from there, it just kind of went viral and just really opened so many doors for me. And, you know, I've been invited to radio, TV, there were newspaper articles, magazine articles, and I wrote my book, and it just... Every time I was asked to speak, somebody in the audience would then ask me to go and speak elsewhere. And I used to call myself an accidental speaker. It just kind of, happened. I didn't intend to be a speaker, but I realized that I can stand on the stage and share my story, which is one of sexual violence. Yeah. And it almost feels like it's a duty. If I can do that, then I should, to really help end the shame, the stigma and the silence for other people.
Mm-hmm. So I've got so many questions coming through my head at this precise moment. So let's start with, what did you do before?
Well, as I said, I was a psychotherapist for about 12 years. Before that, I worked with Women's Aid for about 14 years. I was a volunteer at Rape Crisis. And even before that, I was a makeup artist for a long time. So quite contrastingly different.
Yes, yes. And did the positions where you were sort of helping people, did that come out of your own experience, even though you hadn't?
Yeah, it did. I was obviously always interested in organisations that help women that were fleeing abuse or violence. I hadn't actually shared my story yet, but it was obviously always in my heart. I wanted to help other women going through that, to let them know that they can get through it.
Mm-hmm. So what changed? What happened 6 years ago? You, as you say, stood up and spoke about it publicly for the first time. How did that come about?
I guess it was a process. I'd done a few magazine articles, newspaper articles, and they'd asked to put my name or my photo, and I said no. So I was always one of these women that had written an article, but it was one of these silhouetted black photographs. Yeah. And when eventually, I just got tired of being ashamed for a crime that was committed against my body. It was nothing to do with me. It was down to the two men who decided to gang rape me when I was just 13. So I just got tired of holding on to inappropriate shame for years. And the only way I could end that shame was to step into it and show people that I really don't care who knows about what happened to me anymore.
So that day, I'm just intrigued. Did you turn up to talk about something else? Had you planned to do it?
This was actually shared online on a website.
Right.
And from that, somebody then asked me to go speak and share my story. So the first time I spoke in public was at a Festival of Light. It was at Keele University. So I very much knew what I was going to speak about.
Yeah.
And I didn't really plan it, to be honest. I just, trusted that I would know the words when they came to me, which was maybe not so great now, looking back on reflection, but it was fine. I sat down, which I don't normally do now when I talk, and halfway through the fire alarm went off, but actually it was fine. I opened my mouth and the words came to me, thankfully. The words came out, and I saw the impact that it had on the audience. And at the end of every event, whenever I speak, people will always share their own story with me, and that happened straight away. And that really just motivated me, I guess, to carry on.
And I imagine, sadly, that's probably quite a lot of people.
Sadly, my story is not uncommon. My story is the story of many, many men and women on this planet, and children somewhere every day that somebody will be abused or raped. So yeah, my story is very common.
So without wishing to steal your thunder, because this is what you speak about elsewhere anyway, could you tell us a bit about what happened, how you explain the story?
How I explain the story when I speak?
Yes.
And I don't really hold back. I just say how it was, because I don't believe, we should be, I don't want to traumatize my audience, but I don't want to make it easier for them to digest either. It was interesting, actually. I got involved in a conversation today on Facebook on whether there should be triggers in books. So when I wrote my memoir, Unbroken, my publishers decided in the chapter that I call All of One Night, which explains all the details, they thought it was too much for people to read. And they put this great big trigger warning, if you read further on, this will go into details about that night, blah, blah. And I think, well, I didn't get a trigger warning when I was 13 years old, I had no warning this was going to happen to me. And how can we protect people all the time if we want them to know what goes on? So I do say it as it is, but I don't traumatize people, because I also then show them that I am the victor in my life. I have not just triumphed over adversity. I have jumped forward, not just jumped back from what happened to me, because really the end of my story is that I chose to forgive them, which was, I guess, nothing to do with them, but it really was something that set me free. And I just refused to be identified by what had happened to me. So even though my story is one of pain and trauma, it's also one of finding your courage, your resilience, and your strength, which is really my message for other people, to give them hope as well.
That's interesting, because it's sort of, the whole trigger thing is sort of, that happens when you haven't done what you sound like you've done. So it's unresolved stuff that triggers.
Absolutely. And how can we prepare for every single trigger event? If somebody's reading a book or watching a film, we don't know what people's triggers are. You can close the book or turn the film off. And I also think if we're getting triggered, I'm a psychotherapist as well, then it's actually our mind is showing us where the work still is. This is exactly where you need to do the work. It's not easy, and I have had a lot of therapy, but it is very possible to heal and have a great life.
And had you had a lot of that therapy leading up to what you do now? I guess you must have
I've had a lot of talking therapy, and I've also had a lot of kind of alternative therapy, a lot of body therapy, because the trauma very much gets trapped in our cells, which is why we get triggered. A sound, a smell, a sight, these can trigger things, which shows you that it is not just coming from our mind. A trigger is a feeling, really. It's not a memory. Which is why it's so powerful, because it takes us straight back to an event, and it's why it's so visceral, because we really do feel it as if we're right back there at that age. So they're hard to deal with, but the trick is to really ground yourself and not fight it, which is easier said than done, I know.
Yes, yeah. So as you started to speak, you got invited, you said you're sort of an accidental speaker. How did you then sort of turn it into a business and create that sort of?
Well, I realized I was getting asked to speak more and more, and I looked at the two things that I really did. One was working as a psychotherapist and one was speaking, and I thought I can't do both now. It's getting too much. So I had to make a decision, which was about 1.5 years ago. Maybe it wasn't the best timing, obviously, since March 2020, but I decided I would work as a speaker. And that was really, I think, December 2018, I had this thought, and I thought, if I'm meant to be a speaker, then I would like a sign that this is meant to be. I do like signs. I believe that life does support me in some way. And so I asked myself, if I'm meant to be a speaker, then I would love to work internationally. And I thought, this is never going to work. But I woke up literally on January the 1st with an invitation to go speak at a convention in Johannesburg with a professional speaking association in South Africa. And then on the 5th of January, I had my first paid international event, and that was to speak for UNICEF at a convention in the Maldives. Wow. And I thought, okay, well, this is a good sign. I'm going to take this as a good sign. So that was why I decided this is my destiny, or this is my path, really.
That was such a great sign. Most professional speakers have not spoken in the Maldives, I would suggest.
I have to say, it was rather lovely.
So we're sort of working at a different time, as we've already said, with the pandemic and all that sort of brought. But what do your days normally look like? And maybe we've got a before and after version.
Well, there's a lot more Zoom, and I have to be really careful that I don't do too much Zoom, because I could definitely get zoomed out. But obviously, like most people in the speaking world, most of my speaking events have been cancelled or postponed for this year. So my diary was really busy to not very busy at all. So I've done a lot of webinars. I'm invited on to radio, and I've done things like that. But actually, as of today, I've recorded my own episode of my own podcast series called Unbroken, the podcast with me. And I just had a calling, a feeling that I should do something, because I'm so lucky in my journey. I have met the most incredible people. I'm a storyteller for the Forgiveness Project, and I'm also involved in research with another organization called the Global Resilience Project. And Emma, who heads that one up, has taken 50 thrivers, she calls us, from all over the world, and she's interviewed us, and she's researched what do we do that makes us thrive, and she's come up with 9 secrets to thriving. So I have access to all these amazing people. So I really believe in the power of sharing stories, and I think if a story is heard at the right time for someone, it has the power to be transformative. So I want to give these people voices to offer hope to other people.
Can I ask a bit about forgiveness? You mentioned before that that's one thing that you have done in terms of those men that you talked about, and you just mentioned it now with the Forgiveness Project. You said it was important. How does that happen? Why is it important? Is it something that not everyone
It's not important for anyone else apart from myself. People will say you can't tell me to forgive, and I'm not a forgiveness preacher. I don't tell people that they have to forgive, in order to move on. But my eldest daughter was 13, the same age that I was, and it triggered many, many memories for me. And I went back to therapy again. The last time actually I was in therapy, and near to the end, my therapist just made this suggestion, which just sent me on this journey of inquiry. He said, maybe they weren't born rapists. And I was at first outraged because, I thought they were evil, sadistic animals, and I wanted something similar to happen to them so they would, understand exactly the impact. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, we're all born blank sheets. We all come into the world the same. And I really wondered what they had experienced to make them choose that night. And I realized that, when they were dehumanizing me, they're only dehumanizing themselves. And I felt compassion in my heart towards them, which really took me by surprise because I wanted to hate them forever. But when I was filled with hate and revenge, they would have had no idea. I was literally handing all my power over to them by filling myself with hate. And, it wasn't impacting on them in any way. It was only harming me and my husband and my kids and my friends. So I made the choice to forgive, and it is a choice. And it really just cut the ties that chained me to them, and it just cut any ties that really stopped my own personal growth because it kept me back in the past. And forgiveness for me is really, it's about understanding that we get conditioned by life, that, we get corrupted, and that actually essentially there is goodness in everybody. I do believe that. I do believe when I've looked at babies that I've never seen an evil baby. When you look at a young baby, that we're all born a blank sheet. But forgiveness, ultimately, it was my key to freedom. It just set me free.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. So your life's changed a bit with the pandemic and lots more Zoom and everything else. On the basis that you're now working from home, you're on Zoom a lot more. You haven't got that traveling thing going on. How do you integrate your business life and your work life? A lot of people are currently saying that they can't stop it and they keep working and their life is full of work.
When it comes to the 5-6 o'clock of the evening, then that is my evening. I really will try not to do any talks or be involved in any webinars or any Zooms unless it's somewhere, overseas, like if it's Australia or something or whatever. There's no other way around it. But I really don't work at the weekend, and I take good care of myself. I recognize that self-care is not selfish. It's really important. I learned that the hard way. And so, I have limited hours that I work. I will really not do too many Zooms per day, maybe 1 or 2. And I just kind of try to balance everything.
It's interesting because a lot of, there could be a lot of things that happen sort of evenings and weekends that people sort of ask you for. But it really does come down to just setting what your boundaries are and then know what you can say yes or no to. Whereas I think sometimes people just say yes to anything and then end up with their...
I won't anymore.
Yeah. It's something years ago I decided that I didn't want to work evenings and weekends, and I do some coaching for people in Australia, and obviously some of the hours work and some of them don't. And every time they ask me to take somebody else on, I just say, only if they can work in the day. And they obviously probably think I'm a bit inflexible. But it's like, no, I don't want to work evenings, so I'm not going to. It's
Absolutely. Fine. And I'm the same. I don't apologize. I say, this is my calendar and this is when I'm free. If it suits, it's great. And if it's not, I will try to find a way. But sometimes it's not always possible.
Mm-hmm. And I'd imagine the sort of thing that you're sharing for this, some of the places you're sharing it for are probably more flexible, to be fair, because you have such a compelling story. And if they want you, they've just got to make it work, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, people are great, actually. Obviously, during the pandemic, people are a lot more flexible. And for me, what's actually the good thing that's come out of it is that we don't need to be perfect anymore. I was always trying before to be so perfect, but it's actually taught me to really let go. If my dog barks, which he did this morning in the middle of a podcast, or if the Amazon delivery man rings the doorbell, it's okay. If I'm sitting here in my joggy bottoms, which I am at the moment, and my slippers, that's okay as well. It doesn't really matter anymore because we're all doing that.
Yeah. I had a call the other day, and I thought it was our organising team for a seminar, series that's kicking off next week. But it turned out that they'd invited a couple of speakers without realising they'd been invited, because we'd changed the meetings around. So there was all a big confusion. So 2 speakers turned up and I was sitting there in my pyjamas because it was 11 o'clock at night. So I normally would be in my pyjamas, but
nice.
it was great. It was the only time we could meet. But as you say, nobody batted an eyelid. I did reassure them that I won't be turning up in front of the hundreds of people watching in my pyjamas next week, though.
Good to hear.
So what about how you get things done? What sort of tools and apps and to-do lists and the like do you use? Are you
I realised I'm not very techie. I've only just today set up Calendly, which was great, but then I realised every meeting had to have the same time slots, and I didn't do that. So somebody just sent me a link and it was like, oh, I can't do that. Why is that gone there? So I had to go in and rejig it all. So once it's up and running, I'm sure it'll be a help. But at the moment, I can't get it to go into my diary on my phone. So these things, sometimes I think I'm just better with pen and paper. I know it's a bit old fashioned, but I do have some apps, but not many. I don't really use too many things to help me out. I'm just, it's just me by myself, really. So yeah, not very technologically minded. I don't really have a newsletter. People can sign up to my website and my podcast, but that's really about it.
And you mentioned that you've written a book. How did you get that done? It's something that lots of people want to do and don't get round to doing.
Yeah, I made the decision to write my story. The idea just came to me before I had really found my voice. Somebody suggested to me to write my story down. I'd been going to see a teacher for many, many years, and he just put down all the details from that night. And that really took me about 4 years to write 12 pages, a long time. And then there was a Forgiveness Project event up in Glasgow, which is unusual. They're mostly in London. So I went along, and there was a woman called Marion Partington, whose sister Lucy was murdered by Rose and Fred West, the serial killers.
Right, yeah.
And when I heard her speak, I just saw this piece that emanated from her and the impact telling her story had on the audience. The founder of Forgiveness Project is a woman called Marina, and she calls us story healers rather than storytellers. And I just felt that from her so much. And I bought her book from her, which is an amazing book called If You Sit Very Still. And in it, she had written, "Now you must speak." And I thought, oh, I could write down my story. I'm just going to write it down for me. And the moment I had that thought, literally, it was like the words downloaded into my consciousness. I just saw all the words flying around my head every night when I was trying to get to sleep. And in about 8 weeks, I kind of say I vomited my book. I literally just would pull the words from the air and put them down onto paper. And I'm very lucky, just in about 3-4 months later, I had secured a contract with a traditional publisher. So something did support me. I don't know where it came from, but I was very supported in the process.
And quite often publishers have quite sort of draconian editing processes. Mm-hmm. How does that work when it's a very personal story?
Well, I had worked with a friend who had read the 12 pages previously. He also went to the workshops that I went to. So he obviously knew my story, and I wanted it to be in good condition because my old mindset of, leaving school with no qualifications, I bet I can't write well, blah, blah. So I wanted it to be in a good condition. So it was edited by him. And when it went to John Blake Publishers, my editors, they said it just needed a very light edit. They don't change any details. They just really put it into their house style. So it could just be from changing numbers to numbers and words or specific words that they say. Even though they say it was a light edit, when you get the document in and you see all their track, edits on it, it's like, whoa, that's a light edit. I don't know what a big edit is, but the essence of the story didn't really change.
Yes. And how has that helped you in your speaking?
Absolutely helped me. So when I went to speak in South Africa, it was because I was attending the Professional Speaking Association. It was their convention for the very first time. And I sat next to a lovely guy called Paul from Johannesburg. And he said, "What do you speak about?" And I had a copy of my book. I said, "Here you go. This is what I speak about." And he took my book. And he was the one who phoned me on Skype to me January the 1st and said, "You need to come to South Africa to share your story." And I went, "What?" He said, "I've read your book." I said, "You've never heard me speak?" He said, "It's fine. I have read your book. I know you'll be great." And I did. I went to Johannesburg and spoke there.
Wow. So that is such a great story on the basis that so many sort of gurus teach that, your book is your calling card and all that sort of thing. And
such a good business card. It really is.
Yes. It clearly it was. So tell us about how you look after yourself? You've talked already about, having therapy and all that sort of stuff, and clearly that's your background anyway. Mm-hmm. But sort of your whole body, your mind, how do you keep yourself well and energized to do?
I've always really been really involved with exercise, because many years ago, when that night took place, I very much left my body and I never felt connected in for years. So I do as much as I can to ground myself, I guess. So I am back at the gym. I lift weights 3 times a week. I am back at yoga, which I also go 3 times a week. And because of where I live, I have access to the hills. So I've been climbing Munros every weekend. So I very much exercise a lot, or maybe more than the average person. But yeah, I love to be out in nature. I walk my dog every day, and I'm very fortunate where I live here. I can be in my local country park in 15 minutes and see the Highland cows. That, is a beautiful setting. Yeah. And I can be at the beach or the hills in 45 minutes, an hour. So walking in nature and being physical, getting back into my body, really keeps me grounded and nurtures me as well.
Yes. And it sounds like that's something that you learned quite early on in terms of your sort of recovery.
Yeah, when I discovered that I wasn't really in, it's like I'd left my body, but I never came back in, which I understand now. When we're under extreme trauma, we have to leave. Otherwise, I would have died. I wouldn't be here now. And it's a very, very common experience for a lot of people that have an out-of-body experience. But when I saw that, I did whatever I could to get back in, because I realized I wasn't present. I wasn't really in the moment. I was kind of living life, but on autopilot. I was this body, but there was nothing inside. I was a shell. So learning to connect and get back in, becoming very aware of my thoughts and my feelings, absolutely has helped me.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I'm intrigued about is, you talked about resilience. You talked about the organisation that you've been working with, and I wonder, with your background as well, whether it's sort of helping or hindering when you do speak, because when you talk to people who've had sort of trauma and they want to then talk to you, I guess there's a real risk that you end up taking on some of their trauma and it takes you sort of back or to somewhere else that's potentially an issue. But obviously you've got a different background to a lot of people. You've been trained. How do you keep yourself resilient in those situations? I mean, you must hear so many stories about such.
I hear tons of stories, and I don't know if it is so much to do with my training, but obviously when I worked as a psychotherapist, we always had supervision, so we could always take whatever issues came somewhere. But I think I couldn't do what I do if I really wasn't okay. I would never, ever recommend anyone to use the stage as therapy, because it's awful for the speaker and awful for the audience. So I know that I can say things that are difficult. I did a TEDx last year, and it was called Unbroken, Speaking the Unspeakable. So I'm very capable of speaking the difficult things, and I couldn't do that if I really wasn't in a good place. So that has come from, as I said, years of getting back to me, the me that I was before all of this happened. And cleaning up the mess, cleaning up the trauma, really. I kind of call it draining the swamp.
And have you got tips for resilience for people generally? And I don't mean necessarily people who've had, really traumatic situations, but, how can people keep themselves resilient? We're in a challenging time now, and it seems really chronic. It doesn't feel like it's an end, does that?
It's going to be different for everybody, but the best thing we can do is to really increase our awareness, to really pay attention to where your thoughts go, what does trigger you, what gets you annoyed, and see if you can find a way to connect, to ground yourself, to even simply come back to your breath. We always have our breath, and if we can connect with our breath, we can calm ourselves down. That's really all it takes, is just to be aware and to connect and to be grounded.
And what about your own sort of development, learning and improving and so on? What sort of things do you do to keep yourself moving forwards?
Well, before all of this, I'm always going on courses or doing something to expand myself. Like right now, I've got no idea how to launch my own podcast, but I decided this is what I wanted to do. So, I speak to people a lot, but actually, even though the person I spoke to today, I've known him for a few years, I was actually quite nervous. And I thought, gosh, this is because this is something new. When we do the same thing over and over again, it's very comfortable. So, even though I felt quite nervous, I thought, well, what do I say at the start of a podcast? How do I finish it? All this stuff, which I should have maybe thought about before I started, but I thought that's good. It's good to challenge myself. So yeah, new situations are always good. And I certainly was very challenged at the start of lockdown. I surprised myself. It was a lot harder than I thought. I thought I would really be okay because I am so resilient. And I had to go back to simple techniques like taking it a day at a time, grounding myself, being out in nature, eating good food, exercising well, turning off the news before bedtime, doing all the things I would recommend other people do. I had to really tell myself to pay attention as well.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting because I think it sort of comes in waves. I remember at the beginning of lockdown, it felt shocking, and it was like there were a few weeks where I felt a bit sort of spaced out, didn't really know what to think. And then it seemed to sort of settle into a bit of a routine, and we sort of seemed to know what was going on. And then every so often I'd have almost like a flashback. People talk about when you've had traumatic situations, it suddenly hits you, sort of thing. And that's what I felt like at the beginning of
because it was our trauma, but it was also a collective trauma.
Yeah.
We're kind of all in this together, and at the moment, if there is an incident or if something, we heal and that kind of ends. But at the moment, there's no end.
No.
A clear end in sight, and as we're seeing every day, every week, we're getting different information. It's always changing. We don't know, especially in Scotland, what the lockdown procedures will be, won't be. So there doesn't appear to be any end. But for me, and it's what happened with everything when I finally came to accept I can only control the things that I control. So that's really was my focus as well. That really helped me. And I had to accept this is going on right now, but also I know that this will not last forever. Yes, it feels like it, but it will not last forever. I have no idea how long it will take to be over, but it will be over one day. We'll always, I think, have to learn to live with this. It's not going to go away, but this will not last forever. And that keeps me sane as well.
No, one of my Facebook friends, every weekend, he's a bit of a historian, and he writes stories as well. And he writes a little thing, where I say he certainly has done for the last few weeks, and about some sort of illness from like the Middle Ages or the big times or whatever. So he talked about the St. Vitus dancing?
Yes, actually, I one of my friend's daughter had that.
Oh, really?
It's a strange thing, yeah. You kind of go into fits of movements. Yes, she had it actually after a very, very high temperature, and she had tonsillitis, and she was admitted to hospital with it, and she couldn't stop moving for about a month.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it still existed. So he talked about it was in like the 1600s or something, and people ended up sort of dancing around the villages, which in sort of mythical ways has been turned into that they were dancing, but it was, as you say, the fact they couldn't sit still, sort of thing. And then this
movements,
and then this last week he talked about the thing that killed Henry VIII's brother, which enabled him to marry Catherine of Aragon, and then all of that happened, and that was some sort of high temperature, and lots of people died, and all that sort of stuff. And it's interesting when you read that, you sort of think this has happened every however long in our history, but because we haven't seen it in the same way, it feels so
like,
shocking, weird, odd, like how can it be possible? But then you look at history,
it's like a Black Mirror episode, isn't it? It's like a science fiction movie for us. You're right, history shows us every 100-200 years there will be a pandemic, there will be a virus of some description.
But we feel like we're so sort of civilized in comparison to 200 years ago that we just don't imagine that can possibly be true for us, and yet here we are.
And I guess that's maybe about getting complacent or just not paying attention.
Yes, yeah. So last couple of questions. Firstly, what about those days where it goes horribly wrong? What do you do those days? How do you get through that?
I normally put on my walking boots and take the dog out for a walk, go stomp in the woods for a bit, or go climb a hill, have a bit of chocolate, a glass of gin. That normally does it for me. And just accept, tomorrow's another day. It's fine. Everything's always okay.
Yes, again, that this too shall pass.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And so what about, I suspect the beginning answer to this question is going to be the same. What about those days where you get to live more, which is where I say you get to do more of the things that you want to do and less of the stuff that you don't? What do they look like?
It's just balance, I think, having a good life and work balance. I'm fortunate that I don't depend on my speaking business for my livelihood. I have another stream of income. So for me, speaking has always been about speaking from the heart. It's something that I'm passionate about because I'm really committed to ending the silence for a lot of people, because I think when we don't speak out, we hold ourselves back. And every day I will be contacted by someone that's either read my book or heard me on the radio or seen a webinar now or a Zoom talk. And that's what motivates me. That's what keeps me going, because they will then share their story, how I've helped them, open up to someone or write their story down. And that's what really it's all about for me.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. Thank you, Madeleine. It's been really interesting talking to you today. Tell people how they can find out more about you and get in touch.
Sure, you can just go to my website, madelineblack.co.uk, and I am on all the social medias. You'll find me all over the place.
Lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All this information is available in the show notes. If you go to powertolivemore.com/, in this case, 186, then you'll find them there. And this week I just want to do a little public service announcement. The podcast is being published on Black Friday, and it's just a reminder really to only buy things if you absolutely need them and if you'd have bought them anyway, rather than randomly buying things because they're a bargain. I know we all do it at times, but it can be really tempting when you see something that's a really good deal and it's like a scarcity thing. It's only on that day, although Black Friday does seem to be about Black Week or 2 weeks nowadays, doesn't it? It goes on seemingly for ages. In fact, I looked at something that we have been planning to buy for a few months, and we were waiting to buy it on Friday because we hoped it was going to be cheaper. And I looked on their website today to find that they've sold out already, and it's only Wednesday. So, I'm not sure that this Friday thing's working for me. But anyway, so that's the end of my public service announcement. Again, the show notes are at powertolivemore.com/186, and we look forward to speaking to you next week.
Use your power to live more.